My blood turned to ice the second my father dropped the binder in front of me. It hit the polished walnut table with a flat, expensive crack, and every head in the boardroom snapped in my direction under the hard fluorescent light. The pages inside were glossy, tabbed, color-coded, arranged with the kind of care people use when they're about to destroy someone in public. My brother Owen was already standing by the wall monitor with one hand in his pocket and the other wrapped around a clicker. Aunt Celeste sat to my left with her manicured fingers laced over a legal pad, posture straight as a blade. My mother didn't look at me at all. She just adjusted the gold bracelet on her wrist and stared at the water glass in front of her as if this were weather passing through. At the far end of the table, our outside patent counsel, Daniel Kessler, cleared his throat and shifted in his leather chair. Nobody spoke. Then my father leaned down, planted both palms on the wood, and said, "You thought you could steal from your own family and walk away with it." The air in the room felt thin, filtered, metallic. "My name is Nora Vale. I'm 34. And this is the story of how I turned the invention my family mocked at Sunday dinner into the thing that bought back my life for $100 million. Owen clicked the remote, and my prototype appeared on the screen behind him, brushed steel housing, black ceramic core, heat map renderings, internal diagrams. My design, my work, my nights, my weekends, my skin under fluorescent shop lights, and my coffee gone cold beside an oscilloscope at 2 in the morning. On the slide above it, in thick red letters, he had typed confidential company property. He smiled without warmth. "Do you want to explain," he said, "why a term sheet from Kestrel Energy references technology developed in our facilities using our people while you've been pretending this little hobby project was yours?" Little hobby project. That was generous compared to what they used to call it. My father pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly, the way a judge settles in before a sentence. He was still wearing the charcoal Brioni suit he saved for lenders, funerals, and board votes he intended to win. His silver cuff link caught the light when he reached for the binder again. "You have 2 choices," he said. "You sign an assignment today, acknowledge the intellectual property belongs to Vale Industrial Systems, and we keep this internal. Or we proceed formally." "Formally," Aunt Celeste added, finally looking at me, with full documentation. Her lipstick was the exact shade of dark cherry she wore to every difficult meeting. She had perfected the art of speaking softly while trying to cut your throat. I looked around the room. At Owen, who was rocking back slightly on his heels like a man enjoying front-row seats to his own performance. At my mother, Diane Vale, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. At Celeste Mercer, my father's younger sister and the company's CFO, who had spent most of my life treating me like I was a temporary administrative problem with good grades. At Daniel Kessler, the lawyer, who looked deeply uncomfortable in the kind of way expensive men do when they realize their invoice is about to become evidence. "Say something," Owen snapped. I folded my hands in front of me. He hated that. The stillness. The lack of panic. Owen needed motion around him. Needed people to flinch so he could feel tall. He took a step closer to the table, tie loosened 1/2 inch, jaw working. "You hear me? This isn't your garage science fair, Nora. This is theft." My mother finally spoke, quiet and tight. "You embarrassed your father." There it was. Not concern. Not confusion. Not even disappointment. Optics. I let my gaze drift back to the slide. They'd used the decoy render. That was the first thing that told me how frightened they actually were. The real prototype, the one Kestrel had tested under non-disclosure in a lab outside Milwaukee, had a split-channel thermal bypass and a reinforced lattice geometry that reduced failure rates by almost 40% under peak load. The version Owen had on the screen was the old mock-up I'd seeded in a folder 3 months earlier when I realized someone inside Vale Industrial was snooping through my files. It looked convincing to anyone hungry and stupid, which, unfortunately for them, described my family perfectly. My father opened the binder and turned it toward me. Inside were stills from hallway cameras, copies of badge logs, printed emails, photographs of me carrying equipment into a workshop. They gathered this together like vultures, I remember thinking, and somehow never once wondered why I left so much for them to find. Owen tapped the screen again. "You used the Ravenswood prototyping suite on company time." "No," I said. He blinked. "No. No," I repeated evenly. "I didn't." Celeste made a small sound through her nose. "Nora, Please don't make this uglier than it has to be. I almost laughed at that. Ugly. As if ugly had arrived in the room with me. 3 months earlier, at a Sunday dinner in my parents' house in Winnetka, my father had asked me, in front of 8 people, 2 servers, and a whole table covered in white linen and crystal, why I was still wasting evenings on my portable radiator fantasy. Owen had called my invention a lunchbox for anxious engineers. My mother had told me, with that mild smile that never reached her eyes, that intelligent women often confused obsession with purpose. Celeste had asked if I planned to turn it into jewelry next. Even my cousin Patrick, the family's favorite attorney and resident parasite, had lifted his wine glass and said, "To Nora's stainless steel shrine to unemployment." They all laughed. I remember watching the candlelight move over the silverware and deciding, in that exact moment, that if any of them ever realized what I had actually built, they would try to take it from me. I was right. Owen clicked again. New slide. A draft patent abstract. My terminology, slightly mangled. My phrases, badly understood. "Here," he said too loudly. "Your own language. Distributed thermal stabilization module for critical infrastructure continuity." "Ring a bell." "It should," I said. "I wrote it." My father's gaze sharpened. "For this company. For myself." His palm flattened against the binder. "Careful." That one word used to work on me. When I was 16, and brought home a regional robotics medal, and he told me not to get ideas about my future. When I was 22, and he made me take an operations role at Vail instead of accepting a research fellowship in Zurich. When I was 29, and he said the family had invested too much in me to watch me drift into academic vanity. Careful had always meant stay small. Stay useful. Stay within the lines we drew around you. I looked at Daniel Kessler. "Did you review the chain of custody on any of this?" Owen barked a laugh. "You're in no position to ask questions." Daniel shifted. "I reviewed what I was provided." "Of course you did," I said. Celeste leaned forward, bracelets whispering softly over the table. "Nora, enough. Sign the assignment, and we can discuss compensation." Compensation. They were trying to buy back something they had laughed at for years, now that a third party had validated it. That was the part that should have hurt. Oddly, it didn't. By then the hurt had already burned itself clean. What remained was clarity. Owen pulled a pen from his inside jacket pocket and slid it toward me. "Be smart for once." I looked at the pen. Black lacquer. Gold trim. One of my father's. Probably deliberate. Everything with Richard Vail was theater. Even humiliation had brand consistency. Then I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and set it face up on the walnut table with a soft click. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's eyes dropped to the screen. Owen's shoulders stiffened. Celeste's mouth thinned by a fraction. "What are you doing?" my mother asked. I unlocked the phone, opened a folder, and turned it slightly so all of them could see. "Before anyone signs anything," I said calmly, "I think we should start with the first lie." Owen gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You think you're in control of this room?" I met his eyes. "I know I am." Heels from someone passing in the hallway struck the marble outside like a metronome. Inside, nobody moved. I opened the first file. The image on my screen was a lease agreement. Not glamorous. Not dramatic. Just 6 pages of black text and signatures for a workshop unit in Ravenswood, dated 14 months earlier and registered under Lattice Harbor LLC. My LLC, formed with my own money, using my own attorney, months before I informed anyone in my family that I was building anything more serious than a side experiment. "This," I said, tapping the date, "is the lease for the workshop where the prototype was developed. Not Vail property. Mine." Owen scoffed. "That proves nothing." I opened the second file. A spreadsheet. Vendor receipts. Ceramic composite orders. Custom milled housings. Thermal gel cartridges. Testing sensors. Every purchase came from my personal account or Lattice Harbor's. No company card. No reimbursement requests. No internal purchase order. No Vail vendor code. "This," I said, "is every materials purchase for the last 14 months. Paid personally. Itemized." Celeste sat back a little. It was small, but I saw it. The first retreat. My father's voice lowered. "Where did you get those?" I looked at him. "From my records." Owen snapped. "You can fabricate spreadsheets in 5 minutes." True, I said. Which is why I also brought the bank statements, the invoices, the tax filings, and the courier confirmations. I let that settle over the room. Then I opened the third file. It was a screen recording of my email archive, the cursor moving slowly through timestamp messages to a patent research consultant in Madison, then to a testing facility in Milwaukee, then to Mara Ellison at Ellison Ward on LaSalle Street. Each message predated the first internal document Owen had just used against me. Months predated it. The room changed then. Not dramatically. No one gasped. Real power shifts never sound like television. They sound like breathing patterns changing, chairs adjusting. A glass set down too carefully. Daniel Kessler leaned forward. "Ms. Vale," he said. "Who is Mara Ellison?" "My attorney." Owen turned so fast the clicker slipped in his hand. "Attorney for what?" "For this," I said. That landed. My father's face didn't move, but the color left it slowly, draining with the patience of something inevitable. "You retained counsel against your own family?" "No," I said. "I retained counsel because I knew exactly what my family would do if anyone important said my invention out loud." Celeste's voice sharpened. "That is offensive. Is it inaccurate?" She didn't answer. I scrolled again, deliberately slow. I wanted them to feel the time it had taken me to prepare. The hours. The discipline. The fact that while they were laughing over roast chicken in Bordeaux, I was building an exit strategy. The next file was an audio clip. I hit play. Owen's voice filled the room, tinny through my phone's speaker but unmistakable. "Just pull her drive image and send me the design folders. Don't overcomplicate it." Another voice answered, male uncertain. "That's not really cleared through." "It's family," Owen said. "If she cries about it later, I'll deal with it." I stopped the clip. Owen stared at the phone, then at me. "That's out of context." "Is it?" "You recorded me." "No," I said. "Someone else did." My father's attention snapped toward him so quickly it was almost violent. "What drive image?" Owen's face had gone bright with heat. "Dad, this is ridiculous. She's bluffing." I opened the next file. A provisional patent application draft filed under a shell entity called Monarch Thermal Holdings. Same abstract. Same basic concept. Same decoy render they had on the screen. Filed 11 days earlier. The inventor line had been edited. Sloppily. Daniel Kessler actually stood up. "What is this?" he asked. I looked at him. "That's a question for whoever told you this board meeting was about protecting Vale Industrial." Celeste's hand moved to her throat, then away. Owen stepped toward the screen, then stopped himself. My mother finally looked at me fully, and what I saw there wasn't maternal concern. It was fear. Thin, private, social fear. The kind that imagines headlines before handcuffs. My father's voice came out flat. "Patrick filed this." "Through Monarch," I said. "Yes." Owen stared at the phone, then at me. "That's out of context." "Is it?" "You recorded me." "No," I said. "Someone else did." My father's attention snapped toward him so quickly it was almost violent. "What drive image?" Owen's face had gone bright with heat. "Dad, this is ridiculous. She's bluffing." I opened the next file. A provisional patent application draft filed under a shell entity called Monarch Thermal Holdings. Same abstract. Same basic concept. Same decoy render they had on the screen. Filed 11 days earlier. The inventor line had been edited. Sloppily. Daniel Kessler actually stood up. "What is this?" he asked. I looked at him. "That's a question for whoever told you this board meeting was about protecting Vale Industrial." Celeste's hand moved to her throat, then away. Owen stepped toward the screen, then stopped himself. My mother finally looked at me fully, and what I saw there wasn't maternal concern. It was fear. Thin, private, social fear. The kind that imagines headlines before handcuffs. My father's voice came out flat. "Patrick filed this." "Through Monarch," I said. "Yes." Patrick Vale wasn't in the room because Patrick never entered first-wave conflict if he could avoid it. He preferred corridors, cleanup, deniability. My cousin was the kind of lawyer who thought ethics were for people without billing power. He had spent years orbiting my father, feeding his vanity and cleaning his messes. He had also made one crucial mistake. He had trusted metadata. I enlarged the file history. Revision timestamps. User edits. Cross-device sync. My father might not have understood any of it, but Daniel Kessler did. So did Celeste. And Owen understood enough to know a door had just opened beneath him. Actually, I said quietly, you were never proving I stole company property. You were proving you stole mine. No one spoke. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, settling over the polished wood and leather chairs until even the air seemed to bow under it. Owen recovered first, because panic always made him louder. This means nothing. She made fake files. She's manipulating. I opened one last image, a photograph of a decoy prototype on my workbench beside a yellow notepad in my handwriting. At the bottom of the page, circled twice, were the words seed version only. Then I opened another, a test report from Kestrel's engineering division, referencing the actual geometry and performance of the real unit. The numbers weren't redacted. They didn't need to be. They spoke for themselves. Daniel Kessler sat back down very slowly. My father looked at the screen, then at me. Kestrel has already seen the final build? Yes. When? Last Tuesday. Celeste inhaled sharply. My mother closed her eyes for a fraction too long. And they're interested? My father asked. I held a stare. They made an offer. Nobody moved. How much? Owen said, and for the first time all morning, his voice cracked. I picked up the pen he had slid toward me and rolled it once between my fingers before setting it back down. Enough, I said. That you all stopped laughing. That was the moment the room finally understood what had happened. Not that I had built something valuable. They could accept that now, because money had translated it into their language. What they understood was worse. I had built something valuable without them. Outside the family structure. Outside their approval. Outside the system that had kept me useful and small and available for extraction. I had made something they could not claim by simply saying my name belonged to theirs. My father pushed back from the table. This meeting is over. No, I said. This version of it is. His eyes narrowed. Watch yourself. I have been. I slipped the phone back into my bag, stood, and smoothed the front of my blazer. Navy wool. Simple. Sharp. The one Mara had told me to wear because it made me look exactly like what I was. Not emotional, not reckless, not asking. Celeste found her voice. If you walk out now, this becomes hostile. I looked at her. Celeste, you backdated internal R&D memos to support a false ownership claim. We are well past hostile. Owen took a step toward me. You can't threaten us in our own building. I met him halfway with nothing but my eyes, and he stopped. Watch me. Then I picked up the binder my father had used to ambush me, tucked it under my arm, and headed for the door. Nora, my mother called after me. I turned. Her face had softened into something she probably thought looked maternal. Don't do anything rash. I gave her the kindest smile I had left for anyone in that room. I'm not the one who filed a stolen patent application, I said. Then I walked out under the cold office lights, past the glass walls and brushed steel trim, past assistants pretending not to stare, and into the elevator where my reflection looked calmer than I felt. The door slid shut. My pulse finally hit my throat. I exhaled once, long and controlled, and texted Mara Ellison 3 words. They moved today. Her reply came back before we hit the lobby. Good. So do we. They thought they had found my weakness in a folder of planted breadcrumbs and old mock-ups. They had no idea I'd spent 6 months building a trap around their greed and waiting for them to step right into it. The next 2 days moved with the clean, mechanical precision of a machine finally switched on. Mara's office sat on the 22nd floor of a limestone building off LaSalle, all smoked glass, pale oak, and the kind of quiet that only expensive legal talent can afford. The conference room where we met smelled faintly of coffee and paper, and the sunlight coming through the windows turned the edges of every file warm gold. Mara herself was exactly what Richard Vale feared most, unimpressed by money, impossible to rattle, and allergic to inherited power. She was 48, precise, and never wasted a word. Even her jewelry looked billable. When I arrived, she was already standing at the table in a charcoal-sheath dress, reading the board meeting summary I dictated in the car. Beside her were 2 banker's boxes, a laptop, and a yellow folder labeled Monarch. She looked up once. How bad was Daniel Kessler's face? She asked. Like a man realizing he'd accidentally RSVP'd to his own deposition. One corner of her mouth moved. On Mara, that counted as delight. She gestured to the chair beside her. Sit. We have a lot to organize and very little reason to rush. That's the advantage of being right. So we went piece by piece. I gave her the lease, the purchase records, the patent correspondence, the Kestrel diligence requests, the Milwaukee test data, the audio clip of Owen ordering the drive image, the copied shelf filing, the badge logs from Ravenswood, and the notes I'd kept since the night I first realized my family was circling. That night had been 6 months earlier, after another Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The dining room had glowed amber under a chandelier my mother never stopped polishing. There was sea base on china, champagne sweating in silver buckets, and Owen talking too loudly about a distribution deal he hadn't actually closed. I had made the mistake of answering my father honestly when he asked what kept me so busy. It's a thermal continuity unit, I'd said. Compact. Modular. For hospitals, data centers, smaller facilities that can't afford large redundancy systems. Owen had laughed before I finished. So, a backup box. It's more than backup. My Aunt Celeste had taken a sip of wine and said, "Darling, if it were useful, someone would already be selling it." "I'm not talking about a consumer gadget," I'd replied. My mother had placed her fork down with quiet elegance. "Nora, not everything you imagine is a business. My father hadn't even bothered to look up from carving the fish. She doesn't need a business. She needs focus." Patrick had leaned back in his chair, cufflinks flashing, and said, "Maybe she'll sell 3 of them on Etsy." Laughter around the table again. Soft, educated, well-fed, the kind designed to sound harmless while it marks a hierarchy in stone. I didn't defend myself. That part mattered. I simply asked for the salt, finished my dinner, and left 40 minutes early with my shoulders relaxed and my jaw unclenched. On the drive back to the workshop, I called Mara for the first time. "I need someone discreet," I said. "About what?" "My family hasn't stolen from me yet," I told her. "But I think they're going to." She was quiet for a beat. "Good instinct," she said. "Come in tomorrow." That was how the long game began. Mara helped me separate every line between my role at Vail Industrial and my private work. New devices, off-site storage, independent cloud backups, external testing vendors, separate counsel, separate incorporation. We documented every hour, every purchase, every prototype iteration. She also gave me the advice that changed everything. "If they snoop," she said, "let them." So I did. I left seed files where the wrong eyes could find them. Early CAD exports, old renders, incomplete performance tables. Enough truth to look real. Enough error to be fatal. I never lied in a document. I simply arranged what was visible. Owen had always been too arrogant to investigate anything if it already supported what he wanted to believe. Celeste had always preferred a neat paper trail to a truthful one. Patrick assumed access was the same as ownership. My father assumed everyone eventually folded under pressure. All I really had to do was wait for them to act according to character. They did. The first hard proof came from a charge on my company card that I hadn't made, but one I recognized. A late-night print job routed through a copier on the executive floor at Vail. Then a second sign. My workshop camera picked up nothing unusual, yet a sensor log showed the cabinet where I stored older mock-ups had been opened 22 minutes after midnight on a Saturday. Then came the email Owen accidentally forwarded to me instead of Celeste. One sentence buried in a thread about containing Nora before outside interest becomes leverage. Containing. That word told me everything. Mara brought in a digital forensics specialist named Ethan Rojas to harden my systems and monitor access points. Ethan was lean, careful, and permanently looked like he'd slept 2 hours less than everyone else. He spoke in quiet bursts, wore dark shirts with no logos, and seemed almost embarrassed by other people's incompetence. 2 weeks into the job, he sat across from me in the workshop under strips of cold white light and said, "Your brother hired a contractor to image one of your machines through the company network." I kept soldering a test lead while he spoke. "Did they get anything useful?" I asked. He watched me for a moment, then realized what I was asking. "Only what you wanted them to." "Good." That was the evening he stopped looking at me like a client and started looking at me like a co-conspirator. The second reversal came from Bernadette Price. Bernadette had been my father's executive assistant for 22 years. She was 61, wore structured blouses in jewel tones, kept peppermint candies in her desk drawer, and knew more about the company than most vice presidents. She was also invisible in the way competent older women often become around powerful men, constantly relied on, rarely seen. She arranged Richard Vale's calendar, signed for his packages, carried his secrets in labeled folders with immaculate tabs. A week after the Boardroom ambush, she asked me to meet her at a cafe on Clark Street 3 blocks from the office. The place was narrow and warm, with scratched wood tables and a pastry case glowing under soft yellow light. Rain beaded on the front window. Bernadette was already there when I arrived, one hand wrapped around a teacup, a leather tote at her feet. She looked smaller out of the office, somehow, but not weaker. "I don't have a lot of time," she said. I sat down across from her. "Then don't waste it." That made her smile. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were printed calendar entries, courier receipts, and a photocopy of a legal pad page in Patrick's handwriting. Monarch. File before Kestrel diligence complete. Pressure Nora to assign. Use internal resources narrative. I looked up. "Why are you giving me this?" Bernadette stirred her tea once, though she hadn't added anything to it. "Because on Monday night," she said, "your father told Celeste that if this turned messy they could hang the courier piece on Bernie because nobody ever asks what assistants know." The line sat between us. Outside, tires whispered through rainwater. "I gave that family 22 years, she said quietly. "I missed my son's college orientation because Richard had to fly to Cleveland. I worked through chemo because Celeste didn't like retraining people. I have cleaned up more damage than you could possibly imagine, but I won't help them frame me for theft." Her eyes met mine then, steady and dry. "And I won't help them do this to you." I nodded once, not because I wasn't grateful, because gratitude felt too small for what she had just handed me. "There's more," she said. Of course there was. There always is when the people who think they own a room forget the furniture can hear them. From Bernadette we got internal meeting notes, printed at Richard's request, showing the family had discussed neutralizing me before Kestrel's engineers completed their site visit. From Ethan we got recovered Slack fragments between Owen and Patrick talking about cleaning timestamps and making sure Nora looks reactive if she pushes back. From an accounting review Mara quietly commissioned, we learned Celeste had coded outside legal fees related to Monarch under general R&D expense. Careless, greedy, traceable. By Thursday afternoon, we had enough to do more than defend. We had enough to go on offense. That was when Mara made the call. The formal session was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning in a mediation suite on the 31st floor of Harlan Pike LLP, 2 blocks from the river. Kestrel's acquisition team agreed to delay final signature pending resolution of title claims. Vale Industrial, suddenly aware that bluster had become liability, accepted. Patrick stopped answering my messages. Owen sent 3 in one night. "This is out of control. You're humiliating the family. Call me before Dad does something stupid." I archived them without replying. My mother left a voicemail at 11:14 p.m., her voice soft and tired in that curated way she used when she wanted to sound almost vulnerable. "Nora, sweetheart, we all said things in anger. There's no reason outsiders need to get involved. Your father is under terrible stress. Owen feels awful. Call me when you're ready to be sensible." Sensible. I saved it. The next morning a new text arrived from Owen. "You really think those vultures at Kestrel care about you?" I looked at the message while standing in my workshop, morning light stretching pale across the concrete floor. The real prototype sat on the bench in front of me, matte steel and black polymer, compact enough to look modest, powerful enough to rewrite the next decade of my life. I ran my hand over the housing once, feeling the cool metal under my palm. Then I turned the phone face down and got back to work. Tuesday morning came clear and bright. Harlan Pike's mediation floor looked exactly the way people with generational confidence like things to look: gleaming walnut paneling, cream stone floors, thick rugs that swallowed footfall, art chosen to suggest seriousness without personality. The conference room assigned to us had a long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, a wall of windows looking over the river, and light so clean it made every expression easier to read. Mara arrived first, carrying 2 slim binders and a laptop case. I came in behind her with Ethan and Bernadette. Ethan had traded his usual black shirt for a gray jacket that made him look almost corporate if you ignored the eyes. Bernadette wore navy silk and pearl earrings. She looked like what she had always been, a woman who knew exactly where everybody was buried and had finally decided not to cover them with flowers anymore. Across the table, my family filed in like guests arriving late to a wedding nobody wanted. My father looked older than he had a week earlier. Not broken. He was too practiced for that. But diminished. The kind of man who had spent his life making rooms lean toward him now had a slight forward hunch, as if he were bracing against weather. Owen's jaw was tight enough to crack enamel. Celeste carried 3 folders and set them down with controlled force. My mother entered last. Beige silk, diamonds at her ears, face composed to the point of abstraction. Patrick came too, of course, though he avoided looking at me. He had brought his own counsel, which told me more than anything else could have. Kestrel's people were already seated along the side wall. Elena Cho from corporate development, one of their engineering leads, and outside counsel. Elena had met me in Milwaukee during the testing process. She gave me a single nod. Not warm, not cold, just professional acknowledgement. I appreciated that more than sympathy. When everyone sat, the room settled into that brittle formal silence that only exists where reputations are about to be priced. Mara opened the meeting. "Thank you all for making time," she said. Her voice was even, dry, and impossible to interrupt cleanly. "We are here to resolve false ownership assertions regarding the thermal continuity architecture developed by Ms. Nora Vale through Lattice Harbor LLC, and to address related issues of misappropriation, fraudulent filing activity, and evidentiary misconduct." Patrick cleared his throat. "Those are allegations." Mara turned 1 page in front of her. "For the first 2 minutes, yes." Then she connected her laptop to the screen. I had expected Owen to speak first, or Richard, but it was Celeste who lunged. "Before we indulge this performance," she said, "I want the record to reflect that Ms. Vale was employed by Vale Industrial during the relevant development period and had access to company facilities, vendors, and staff." Mara nodded once. "Good. Then let's begin with dates." The first slide appeared. February 3rd, 14 months earlier, Lattice Harbor LLC formed. February 11th, Ravenswood Workshop lease executed. February 16th through June 30th, materials purchases from personal and LLC funds. March 4th, first independent patent prior art consultation. April 9th, prototype shell milled by third-party fabricator. June 12th, first successful thermal retention test. September 8th, external test booked in Milwaukee. October 14th, Kestrel contact initiated. December 2nd, Vale internal access anomalies begin. December 19th, shell entity Monarch Thermal Holdings formed. January 7th, copied provisional draft circulated. January 18th, Kestrel diligence request sent. January 23rd, Boardroom ambush. Every date was backed by a document. Every document had a source trail, lease, receipt, payment confirmation, email header, camera log, fabrication invoice, testing certification, bank statement, tax filing, courier manifest. Mara moved through them without flourish, one by one, as methodically as a surgeon laying out instruments. "This timeline," she said, "establishes independent creation, independent funding, and independent commercialization efforts well before Vale Industrial's attempted claims. It also establishes premeditated efforts to manufacture a contrary narrative after outside acquisition interest arose." Patrick shifted in his chair. "Premeditated is your interpretation." Mara clicked to the next slide. It was his note, the one Bernadette had copied. His handwriting large and slanted. "Pressure Nora to assign. Use internal resources narrative." His face emptied. "I prefer the word documented," Mara said. The engineer from Kestrel leaned back and folded his arms. Elena Cho didn't move at all. My father finally spoke. "Bernadette gave you internal notes." Bernadette answered before Mara could. "I kept copies," she said. Richard turned to her, as if he genuinely could not process the geometry of betrayal. "After everything this family has done for you?" She looked at him with almost clinical calm. "That phrase works better when you haven't just tried to frame me." My mother inhaled sharply. Owen muttered, "Jesus." Mara continued. Next came the access logs. Ethan explained them in clean technical language, pointing to timestamps, badge overlaps, remote imaging events, copied directories, and deletion attempts. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Truth explained by someone competent has a particular kind of violence to it. At 12:22 a.m. on January 5th, he said, a device associated with Vale Industrial's network authenticated against a machine used by Ms. Vale for design storage. The access directories contained intentionally incomplete CED files and early-stage performance tables. Those same data structures later appear, with identical file hash lineage, in the Monarch filing package. Patrick sat up. You're saying these files were planted? Ethan glanced at him. I'm saying the files you relied on were not the current design, and that your site obtained them through unauthorized access. Owen slapped a hand flat on the table. This is insane. We hired you to review security exposure. Ethan didn't even look at him. You hired me to commit a felony badly. A sound escaped Celeste that was half laugh, half shock. Patrick closed his eyes. I watched the fracture line appear between them in real time. My father turned toward Owen slowly. What exactly did you ask for? Owen's face had gone red at the neck. I asked for clarity because she was hiding things. Hiding, Mara said, is an interesting choice of word for property that wasn't yours. Then she played the audio clip. Again, Owen's voice filled the room. Just pull her drive image and send me the design folders. Don't overcomplicate it. This time there was nowhere for him to put it. No boardroom theatrics. No family pressure. Just polished wood, city light, opposing counsel, and his own stupidity laid flat in front of witnesses. He tried anyway. That's not authenticated. It is, Ethan said. That could be edited. It isn't. You were working for us. Ethan finally looked at him then, calm as winter. No, he said. I was working the job you described in the contract. You changed the job in the hallway. I felt Owen's attention swing to me, furious and almost bewildered. You knew, he said. Yes. How long? I folded my hands in my lap. Long enough. Patrick whispered something harsh to his counsel. Celeste was flipping through her own folder too quickly now, pages sticking to her fingertips. My mother kept looking from one face to another as though the right angle might restore control. My father had gone very still, which in Richard Vale meant rage, had become calculation. Mara moved to the patent issues. The screen showed the Monarch filing history, then metadata, then revision traces. The inventor field changed. Filing language pasted from my drafts. Timestamp irregularities. Courier records. Billing codes. And finally the accounting entry Celeste had hidden in R&D. This is where it becomes more than a family dispute, Mara said. We have attempted misappropriation, false filing activity, billing concealment, and clear evidence that a retaliatory ownership narrative was constructed after third-party commercial interests materialized. Celeste lifted her chin. That accounting entry was provisional. Was it? Mara said. Or was it invisible? Celeste's composure slipped for the first time. You don't get to talk to me like I'm some criminal. No, Mara said softly. The records do that on their own. There are moments when a powerful group stops behaving like a group and starts behaving like individuals trying to survive the blast radius. You can see it in where they look, who they stop defending, which name they say first. It was my mother who broke. Richard, she said, voice low and shaking with anger now. Tell me you didn't know Patrick filed anything. Richard didn't answer quickly enough. That was all it took. Patrick sat forward. I filed what I was instructed to file based on representations made to me. Celeste turned on him. Don't you dare. You signed off on the budgeting trail. Because you said we needed coverage. Owen snapped. Coverage for what? Dad told me to get whatever I could before Kestrel locked in. My father's head whipped toward him. Be quiet. No, Owen said, almost laughing now from the edge of panic. No, I'm not going to be the only idiot at this table. You told me she'd fold. You said she always folds. The room went silent again, but this silence was different. Not the controlled kind. This one came apart at the edges. I looked at my father. There it was. Not shock. Not remorse. Recognition. He had just understood something fundamental and irreversible. The version of me he had been using for 34 years no longer existed. Mara let the fracture widen for 3 full seconds before speaking. There are 2 paths from here, she said. The first is private resolution today. Immediate written withdrawal of all ownership claims. retraction of the monarch filing, acknowledgement of independent invention, non-disparagement, payment of Ms. Vale's legal costs and investigation fees, preservation of all related devices and accounts for audit. The second path is public litigation, injunctive relief, and referral to the appropriate authorities regarding filing misconduct, digital access misconduct, and document falsification. Kestrel will, of course, receive the full case record as part of title clearance. Elena Cho finally spoke, her tone almost conversational. And we will reevaluate any future commercial relationship with parties tied to fraudulent ownership assertions. That sentence hit my father harder than the legal threat. Business exile, industry memory, real consequences. Patrick whispered, I need separate counsel. You already have separate counsel, Celeste hissed. Not enough separate. My mother stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. This is obscene. Mara looked at her. No, Mrs. Vale. It's organized. Bernadette, beside me, took out a peppermint, unwrapped it with neat fingers, and put it in her mouth. I almost smiled. Mara slid the settlement packet across the table. The stack was not dramatic. No giant binders. No pounding music. Just 27 pages on heavy paper with signature tabs in pale blue. The document was devastating precisely because it was clean. Every sentence did one job. Every paragraph closed a door. My father didn't touch it. Instead, he looked at me. All of this, he said, voice low, because we questioned you. I held his gaze. No, I said. All of this, because you tried to steal from me after you laughed at me for building it. He leaned back slowly. You always did mistake ambition for disloyalty. I could have answered 100 ways. I could have told him loyalty was what he demanded when he wanted access without accountability. I could have told him the only people who confuse independence with betrayal are the ones who profit from dependence. I could have told him he had spent my whole life calling me difficult anytime I behaved like a person instead of an asset. Instead, I said, you taught me to understand leverage. I just learned it better. Owen made a harsh sound and stood up. I'm not signing anything that says she built this alone. Mara didn't look at him. Then you'll enjoy discovery. He froze. That's the thing about men like Owen. They love battle as long as it stays verbal, social, theatrical. The moment consequences become procedural, they remember they were never actually built for war. Patrick pulled the packet toward himself first. Fast. Too fast. Self-preservation had outrun family unity. Celeste saw it and almost recoiled. Unbelievable. Patrick looked up at her, sweaty now, every expensive inch of him collapsing inward. You want unbelievable? You signed a hidden billing code for a stolen filing and dragged me into it. You did not need dragging. I did when Richard said the board needed something aggressive. My mother pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Stop saying these things in front of outsiders. I spoke before anyone else could. Mother, I said quietly. Everyone important has already heard them. She looked at me as if I'd slapped her, which was almost funny. That family could survive deceit, theft, and sabotage. What it could not survive was being accurately described. Richard reached for the packet at last. His hand was steady until the very final page. That detail stayed with me, absurdly. Not the anger, not the arguments, not even Owen demanding his own indemnity language, while Celeste snapped that he should worry about employment first. What I remember is Richard Vale, who had signed loan facilities, acquisitions, personal guarantees, union settlements, and condolence letters with the same controlled pen stroke for decades, pausing just enough over a signature line for the tremor to show. He signed. Celeste signed next, jaw clenched. Patrick signed with visible reluctance, and asked twice whether the filing withdrawal could be framed as administrative correction. Mara said no. Owen held out the longest, but Elena Cho stood, gathered her notes, and said, Kestrel cannot remain in process while title contamination continues. He signed before she reached the door. My mother didn't need to sign anything legally operative, but she did have to sit there and watch it happen. That may have been the worst part for her. When the last packet was collected, Mara reviewed the post-signing instructions with the same tone she might have used to explain parking validation. Device holds. Courier notifications. Patent office withdrawal sequence. Formal acknowledgement language. Audit deadlines. Everyone nodded because there was nothing left to do but comply. I stood as so did everyone else. The meeting was over, but nobody seemed to understand how to move first. There are rooms where defeat lingers in the furniture. This was one of them. Richard stepped into my path, near the end of the table. The river behind him flashed white in the morning sun. Up close he looked tired in a way I had never seen before, the skin around his eyes a little looser, the authority in his posture no longer effortless. "You could have handled this privately," he said. I thought of the boardroom, the binder, the assignment, the pen. "I did," I said. Then I nodded once toward Bernadette and Ethan. "Next time," I added, "make sure the people cleaning up for you aren't paying attention." He said nothing. Owen muttered my name like a curse as I passed him. Celeste would not look at me. Patrick was already on his phone, probably trying to find a version of the future in which none of this was his fault. At the door I paused and looked back, not because I needed to, but because endings deserve witnesses. My father had once told me, when I was 19 and furious over some slight I can't even remember now, that serious people never chase recognition. If something has real value, he'd said, it doesn't need to beg. He was right, just not in the way he meant. "You were right about one thing," I said to the room. "Real value doesn't beg to be believed." Then I walked out into the bright hallway, and this time nobody tried to stop me. The next 6 weeks passed in signatures, wire instructions, closing calls, and the kind of controlled exhaustion that makes even beautiful things feel administrative. Kestrel moved fast once title was clear. Their acquisition team flew in twice. Engineers visited the Milwaukee site again. We negotiated retention packages for 2 independent contractors who had helped me during testing. Mara pushed where she needed to push, protected where she needed to protect, and never once let me confuse relief with the finish line. On a cold Thursday afternoon in March, in a conference room with pale stone walls and a view of the river breaking into silver under the wind, I signed the final buyout documents. $100 million. The number didn't feel real, not at first. Numbers like that rarely do when you grew up in a family where money was both everywhere and never yours. My father could spend $40,000 on a donor dinner centerpiece and still lecture me for buying precision tooling instead of borrowing from the plant. Owen could lose 6 figures on a vanity distribution deal and still call my prototype wasteful. In our world, money had always been theater unless it flowed upward. This was different. This money was proof. Kestrel didn't buy the invention because my last name opened a door. They bought it because the thermal retention data was undeniable, because hospitals and data centers needed what I had built, because my design worked, because it mattered, because I had done the unglamorous, lonely, repetitive work of making it real while everyone around me was busy underestimating me. When the wires hit, I was in Mara's office holding a ceramic cup of coffee gone lukewarm in my hand. She looked at the confirmation, then at me. "Congratulations," she said. "That's it." She lifted one shoulder. "Would you prefer confetti?" I laughed then. Actually laughed. Not the polite family kind. Not the sharp defensive kind. Something warmer, startled out of me from a place I hadn't accessed in years. Mara's mouth softened. "What will you do first?" she asked. I looked out at the city, all glass and steel under a washed blue sky. "Sleep," I said. But that wasn't the first thing I did. The first thing I did was pay everyone who had stood beside me properly and early. Mara, Ethan, Bernadette, the fabricator who took my midnight calls, the testing team in Milwaukee. Then I set up a trust for myself with governance no veil could touch. Then I bought a loft in Fulton Market with brick walls, tall windows, and a balcony that caught morning light. Then I resigned from Vail Industrial by email, attaching exactly one sentence. Effective immediately. I heard later that Owen threw his phone across his office when he read it. The aftermath unfolded with the exquisite patience of falling masonry. Richard Vail lost his chairmanship 3 months later. Not in some spectacular public coup. Men like him rarely fall that cleanly. It happened through committees, lender concern, health reasons, and a board recommendation that sounded gracious on paper and smelled like smoke in real life. The investigation into the Monarch filing, the concealed billing trail, and the attempted ownership claim made him radioactive in the quiet, expensive way that matters most in his world. He kept the country club membership. He lost the deference. For a man like my father, that was amputation. Celeste resigned before they could formally remove her. The internal audit raised enough questions around expense coding and disclosure practices that her name stopped opening finance doors the way it used to. Last I heard, she was consulting for a mid-sized distributor in Naperville and telling people she had chosen a slower pace. She spent 3 decades treating numbers like obedient servants. It must have shocked her to learn they leave footprints. Owen's fall was noisier. He was stripped of operations oversight first, then quietly exited after a vendor dispute, a failed client renewal, and an absolutely tragic attempt to blame family turbulence for both. 4 months he posted stiff little leadership slogans online beside black and white headshots that made him look like a man auditioning to be trusted. Nobody serious bit. The last reliable update I got was that he was renting a glass-walled office in a co-working space and calling himself a strategic advisor. Owen had always confused volume with value. Outside my father's gravity, the difference showed. Patrick survived, technically, which for him was probably a disappointment. The bar complaint didn't destroy him, but it scarred him. He left his firm before they could make the departure look less voluntary, and his name now lived in that expensive professional purgatory where everyone still takes your call but nobody important returns it. He had built a career on being the cleverest man in rooms full of cowards. It turned out that once the cowards grew scared enough, cleverness became contagious. My mother suffered in the only marketplace she ever truly respected, Social One. The charity board seat vanished. The invitations thinned. Women who had spent years kissing both her cheeks started becoming so busy. She tried for a while to repair appearances with carefully curated brunches and tasteful notes on cream stationery. But scandal lingers in certain zip codes the way perfume lingers in hallways. Faint, elegant, persistent. Then there were the enablers. The vice president who just followed instructions and signed an internal memo without reading it found himself retired 6 months earlier than planned. The compliance manager who ignored the weird billing code got transferred into a role so vague it functioned like exile. The outside courier service that handled Patrick's rushed filing fired the clerk who altered a manifest at someone else's request. Everyone got exactly enough consequence to fit the size of the choice they made. Karmic justice, I learned, is most satisfying when it is proportional. The messages started before the ink on the closing documents dried. Owen texted first. "You made your point." Then, 2 days later, "Dad isn't taking this well." A week after that, "I hope it was worth blowing up the family." Archived. My mother shifted strategies. Her texts arrived in the late evening, soft and polished. "The house feels strange without you. I miss who we used to be. Family should not end in paperwork." Archived. Richard never texted. Richard sent emails. Subject lines, "Only at first." "Call me." Then, "This can still be repaired." Then, "You have responsibilities that outlast business disputes." I read them all once. Then I created a rule and sent every future message into a folder called Record. Not to punish him, to preserve him accurately. Patrick tried the nostalgia route once, incredibly. "We were kids together, Nora. Don't let adults' mistakes define all of it." Archived so fast I almost admire the reflex. There were threats too, though never explicit enough to matter. Friends of the family hinting that I was isolating myself from legacy. Former colleagues telling me I had become hard to root for. One anonymous voicemail from a block number saying, "You think money means you won." I deleted that one while standing in my new kitchen with sunlight warming the concrete floor and a kettle beginning to hum on the stove. The message vanished. The morning stayed lovely. 6 months later, my life had shape again. The loft was quiet in the mornings in a way my parents' house never had been. No footsteps timed around Richard's mood. No voices lowered in hallways. No polished performance. Just exposed brick washed in pale light. The soft grind of coffee beans. The city beginning outside my windows. And the small deep pleasure of not bracing for anyone. I bought a long oak dining table because I wanted to learn what a table could feel like when it wasn't a stage. I filled the bookshelf slowly. I let plants take over one entire corner by the balcony door. I started sleeping with my phone in another room. The first morning I realized I'd made coffee and stood by the window for 10 full minutes without thinking about my family at all, I nearly cried. Not from sadness, from freedom. The buyout changed my finances, obviously, but the part that mattered more was what it changed in my imagination. For most of my life, invention had been something I had to hide inside usefulness. I could build if it helped the company. I could solve if it made someone else money. I could think big as long as the reward traveled up the family tree and came back down to me as permission. Once that structure was gone, I faced a question that felt almost embarrassingly simple. What would I build if nobody got to laugh me out of it first? The answer became Harbor North Labs. Not a vanity fund. Not a revenge project. A real firm, housed in a converted brick building with steel-framed windows and enough workshop space to smell faintly of cedar, solder, and machine oil every afternoon. We focused on overlooked industrial resilience technology, things too practical to be sexy, too early to be bankable, too useful to stay ignored forever. Rural grid backup, cold chain monitoring, compact heat recovery, fire suppression failovers for clinics and municipal buildings. Products built by people who had been told some version of the same lie I'd been told, that their ideas were adorable, unnecessary, too niche, too inconvenient, too strange, too ambitious, too early, too much. I hired carefully, small team, sharp people, no ego collectors. And yes, I hired Bernadette, not as an assistant, never that, as chief of staff. The first day she walked into Harbor North wearing a cobalt blouse and carrying a notebook already tabbed in 4 colors, she stood in the middle of the unfinished main office, sunlight striking the dust in gold bands, and said, "This place has much better energy than your father's building. That's because the lies aren't in the walls yet." She laughed, that low surprised laugh of someone discovering they still can. Working with her became one of the quiet gifts of that year. She knew how to build calm around chaos. She knew when people were posturing, when vendors were bluffing, when a timeline hit a trap. She also knew where every family body was buried, which occasionally turned out to be commercially useful in the abstract. We didn't talk about Richard often. We didn't need to. Some loyalties don't end dramatically. They simply dry out and turn to dust. Mara stayed in my life too, though in a more dangerous role, friend. Once a month, usually on a Friday evening, we'd have dinner somewhere understated and good, Bavets if we could get in, a small place in West Loop if we couldn't, and she'd listen to my newest idea, take one bite of something elegant, and ask the exact question I was hoping not to answer. It kept me honest. Ethan consulted for Harbor North on a retainer. The first time he walked through our office and saw actual access control protocols in place, he looked mildly offended and said, "So you really did learn from your family?" "Only the useful parts," I told him. The karma updates arrived the way they always do, casually, almost rudely normal. One afternoon I was on the balcony outside our second-floor conference room, mug warming my palms, when Bernadette stepped out beside me and said, "You won't believe who I just saw at the BMO branch on Madison." I glanced at her. "Owen." She smiled over the rim of her cup. "Close. Richard. Same navy overcoat. Different face. Different how." She leaned one shoulder against the brick. "The kind of man who waits now." I said nothing for a moment, just looked out over the roofs and vents and strips of sunlit glass. Then I asked, "Did he see you?" "Oh yes," she said. "And that may have been the best part." Another time Elena Cho called to discuss a licensing question on a related architecture, then paused at the end and said, almost as an afterthought, "Your brother reached out through an intermediary last month." I was at my desk, late light crossing the grain of the wood. "For business." He implied he had strategic insight into distributed resilience markets. I smiled to myself. "Did you tell him he does?" She laughed softly. "No. I told him we don't buy proximity and call it expertise." That one tasted particularly good. The only person who truly surprised me was my mother. About 8 months after the buyout, a handwritten note arrived at Harbor North. Cream stationery, blue-black ink. No return address, though I knew hers immediately. The handwriting was as elegant as ever. I was not brave enough when it mattered. I am beginning to understand the cost of that. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted, for once, to tell the truth without arranging it first. No plea, no manipulation, no but family, just that. I read it twice, then placed it in the record folder with everything else. I still didn't respond. Peace, I learned, isn't always generous. Sometimes it is simply disciplined. That autumn, after a long day of design reviews and investor calls, I stood in my kitchen while orange light spilled across the brick wall and the first city lights came on beyond the windows. The air through the balcony door carried the smell of rain on warm concrete. Somewhere below, a siren moved and faded. Inside, everything glowed amber, countertops would grain the edges of the glass. I had a bottle of sparkling wine open, because Harbor North had just closed its second seed investment, this time in a clinic backup system designed by a woman from Dayton whose former employer told her the market was too boring to scale. I loved hearing that sentence now. Too boring to scale. Too practical. Too small. Those phrases had become an invitation. Bernadette arrived 10 minutes later with a bakery box and a scarf looped neatly at her throat. She kicked off her shoes by the door, walked straight to the counter like she'd been coming there for years, and held up the box. "Lemon cake," she said. "Because today felt like citrus. That is a genuinely unhinged metric. It has served me well." We carried our glasses out to the balcony. The sunset had turned the west side of the city copper and rose. All the buildings edged in fire for a few short minutes before the color began to drain into evening. The air was cool enough to raise a faint line of goosebumps on my forearms. Below us, traffic slid through the streets in ribbons of white and red. Above, the sky moved from gold to bruised blue. Bernadette leaned on the railing, looked out over the rooftops, and said, "You know, if someone had told me a year ago I'd be drinking expensive wine on your balcony after leaving Richard Vale's office for good, I would have assumed I'd had a concussion." I laughed softly. "If someone had told me a year ago you'd be my chief of staff, I'd have asked if they were on sedatives." She lifted her glass. "To sedatives, then." We clinked. There was something deeply healing in that moment, and not because it was triumphant, because it was ordinary, warm, light. Two women who had once been placed on opposite sides of a power structure, now standing shoulder to shoulder in the afterglow of surviving it. No speeches, no dramatic reconciliation, just mutual respect with city lights coming on one by one beneath us. "I need to tell you something," Bernadette said after a minute. That tone usually meant either office gossip or a truth that had taken a long time to arrive. "Go on. The day your father mocked your prototype at Christmas dinner last year," she said, still looking at the skyline, "I remember thinking he'd made a mistake." I turned toward her. "He should have asked questions," she said. "But Richard only asks questions when he already likes the answers. That was always his weakness. Owen inherited it." I took a slow sip and let the bubbles sting the back of my throat. "So what are you saying?" She smiled a little. "I'm saying I think they created you." The city hummed below us. Somewhere across the street a rooftop door slammed. I thought about the girl I had been at 16, staying up all night to tune a drive assembly because the machine made sense in ways people did not. I thought about 22, folding my fellowship letter into thirds before throwing it away because my father said family came first. I thought about every dinner, every dismissal, every polished little insult I had swallowed and filed away, not yet knowing I was building an engine out of them. "Maybe," I said, "but not in the way they intended." She tipped her head. "The best kind." We stood there until the last of the orange left the sky. By then I understood something I hadn't been.